Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing something a little different. Instead of one case, we're doing seven. 7 murders. 7 killers who were never caught. 7 cases that have haunted investigators, families, and true crime obsessives for decades. And in one case, for over a century. And I promise you, by the time we get to number 1, your jaw's going to be on the floor. So if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because this is exactly the kind of content we do. And if you're already subscribed, thank you, genuinely. Now let's get into it. Number 7. The Zodiac Killer. Okay, so we're starting with one you've probably heard of, but I promise there's stuff in here that'll surprise you. Because the Zodiac Killer isn't just famous, he is genuinely one of the most bizarre, theatrical, and terrifying criminals in American history. Here's the setup. Northern California, 1968. A 17-year-old boy and his 16-year-old girlfriend are parked near a reservoir outside Vallejo. It's a date night, normal teenage stuff, and then someone walks up to the car and shoots them both. The boy dies at the scene. The girl is shot 5 times in the back while trying to run. No robbery, no motive, no witnesses. 7 months later, it happens again. Same area, different couple, same method. And then, the letters start. 3 envelopes, sent simultaneously to 3 different newspapers. Each one contains a letter claiming responsibility for the murders. And each letter contains a piece of a coded cipher, 1/3 each. Like the killer is literally playing a game with the press. He demands the newspapers publish his codes on their front pages, or he'll go on a killing spree, and he signs every letter with a symbol, a crossed circle. He calls himself the Zodiac. Now here's where it gets even more unhinged. The papers publish the ciphers. The public goes absolutely nuts trying to crack them. And within a week, a schoolteacher and his wife crack the code. Not the FBI, not professional cryptographers. A schoolteacher named Donald Harden sitting at his kitchen table. And what does the message say? Basically, killing people makes me happy, and my victims will become my slaves in the afterlife. Cool, totally normal guy. The Zodiac doesn't stop there. He attacks a couple at a lake, shows up wearing a black executioner's hood, binds them with rope, stabs them with a foot-long knife. One survives. One doesn't. He shoots a cab driver in the back of the head in San Francisco, cuts off a piece of the guy's shirt, and mails it to the police, along with a letter making fun of them for not catching him. He claims to have killed 37 people. Investigators have only confirmed 5. And then somewhere around 1974, the letters stop. Just silence. Over the decades, investigators zeroed in on a guy named Arthur Lee Allen. Witnesses, circumstantial evidence, the whole thing. His house gets searched. His typewriters get analyzed. His handwriting gets compared. And it never sticks. Allen dies in 1992, never charged. More recently, a group of amateur investigators claimed to have finally identified the Zodiac as a house painter named Gary Francis Post, who died in 2018. They pointed to scars, decoded anagrams in the ciphers, photographs. The San Francisco Police Department reviewed their findings and said, "Nope, case is still open. The Zodiac Killer is officially unidentified to this day. He's either dead somewhere, having taken his secret with him, or he lived out a completely ordinary life while the world searched for him. Both possibilities are equally disturbing." Number 6. The Black Dahlia Murder. Okay, buckle up. Because this one is genuinely one of the most disturbing crime scenes in American history, and it happened in broad daylight in Los Angeles in 1947. January 15th, a woman walking through a neighborhood with her daughter notices something in a vacant lot. She thinks it's a store mannequin. It is not a store mannequin. The victim is later identified as Elizabeth Short, 22 years old. And what was done to her, I need you to understand, was not just a murder. It was something else entirely. The body had been completely drained of blood, severed at the waist, cleanly, surgically, with the 2 halves placed exactly 1 foot apart. The skin had been scrubbed, the hair washed, the face carefully arranged, with the corners of the mouth cut back toward the ears in a wide, forced smile. The killer didn't just murder Elizabeth Short. They staged her like an exhibit. The press descends immediately because this is 1947, and tabloid journalism is at its absolute peak. Within days, Elizabeth Short has a nickname, the Black Dahlia, borrowed from a noir film playing in theaters at the time. And here's what gets me. That nickname is glamorous. It sounds like the title of a movie. And I think that glamour has, for decades, gotten in the way of the actual story. Because Elizabeth Short was not a noir character. She was a 22-year-old girl from Massachusetts who came to Los Angeles the way thousands of young women did, chasing something. She worked at a military canteen, did some modeling, had been briefly engaged to a soldier who died overseas. By the time of her death, she was living out of her suitcase, sleeping on friends' couches, trying to figure out what came next. She never got to figure it out. The investigation becomes one of the most intensive in LA history. Over 150 people confess to the murder. All of them get ruled out. The most prominent suspect, a doctor named George Hoddle. His own son, a retired LAPD detective, spent years building a case against him, arguing the evidence points to George for not just the Black Dahlia murder, but for several others too. George Hoddle died in 1999, never charged. Elizabeth Short's killer has never been identified, and every few years, a new documentary promises it finally cracked the case. It never has. Number 5. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. Okay, this one. If you haven't heard of this case, I need you to prepare yourself because this might be the single most unsettling entry on this entire list. Bavaria, Germany. 1922. A remote farm called Hinterkaifeck, sitting on the edge of a forest. 6 people live there. The patriarch Andreas Gruber, his wife, their widowed daughter, her 2 young kids, and a brand new maid who had only just arrived. In the weeks before the murders, Andreas Gruber starts noticing things. Footprints in the snow, leading from the forest to the farm, not leading back. A newspaper from a nearby town that nobody at the farm had ordered or received. Strange sounds in the attic at night. Gruber tells his neighbors. He even brings it up with his priest during confession. But he doesn't call the police. Now here's a detail that makes this so much worse. The previous maid had quit months earlier. She said she had a bad feeling about the farm. Something felt wrong. She left. The new maid? She had arrived the day before the murders. It was her first day. On March 31st, 1922, someone lures the family members one by one into the barn and kills them with a mattock, basically a farming pickaxe. The patriarch, his wife, their daughter, and the 7-year-old granddaughter. All 4 in the barn. Then the killer goes inside the house and kills the toddler in his crib and the new maid in her room. 6 people. And then, I need you to really sit with this. The killer stays. For days after the murders, neighbors report seeing smoke rising from the Hinterkaifeck chimney. The cattle are being fed. The oven is being lit. Someone is maintaining the farm. A killer is walking around that property, among the bodies, for days. Living there. The bodies aren't discovered until 4 days later when worried neighbors finally go check on the family. The investigation goes nowhere. Over 100 suspects are questioned. Nobody is ever charged. And the detail that haunts investigators most? Little Kazelia, the 7-year-old, had been alive long enough after the attack to tear out clumps of her own hair. The case is over 100 years old. It is still unsolved. Number 4. The Villisca Axe Murders, Iowa, 1912. A Sunday night. The Moore family. 2 parents, 4 kids have just come home from a church event, and they've brought 2 young girls home with them. Sisters, friends of the kids, spending the night. 8 people go to sleep in that house on East 2nd Street. None of them wake up. The next morning, a neighbor knocks, gets no answer, and goes inside. Every window is covered, every shade drawn, the house completely dark. And in every bedroom, all 8 people, killed in their sleep with the blunt end of an axe. Here's what makes the crime scene so strange. A 2-pound slab of bacon was placed near the door, just sitting there. Every window in the house had been covered by the killer. The axe belonged to the Moore family. The killer brought nothing. A kerosene lamp had been moved and placed near the bodies. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Nobody saw or heard a thing. This was methodical. This was someone who had clearly thought it through. 2 main suspects emerge across different investigations. A traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly, who had been in Villisca that very night. He was tried twice. First trial, hung jury. Second trial, acquitted. And a local businessman named Frank Jones, who'd had a falling out with the father, never charged. But here's the part that takes this from terrible to wild. Researchers think the Villisca murders might not have been a standalone event. There were a series of very similar axe murders across the Midwest between 1911 and 1912. Same method, same staging, same covered windows. Some investigators believe there was a single killer moving through small towns, striking farmhouses at night. If that's true, this person killed far more than 8 people and was never caught for any of it. Number 3. The JonBenét Ramsey case. Okay, you've heard of this one. Everyone's heard of this one, but I think most people don't fully appreciate just how strange the evidence in this case actually is. Because when you actually sit down and go through the details on not the headlines, not the documentaries, the actual evidence, it raises more questions than it answers. December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado, the day after Christmas. The Ramsey family had just come back from a Christmas party the night before, normal holiday stuff, and then at 5:52 in the morning, Patsy Ramsey calls 911, barely holding it together, because she's found a ransom note at the bottom of the staircase demanding $118,000 for the safe return of her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. Police arrive within minutes. Friends are called. The house fills up with people, and officers search the property. They don't find JonBenét. Hours pass, and then, later that afternoon, John Ramsey goes back through the house at the suggestion of a detective to look for anything unusual. He goes to the basement. He opens the door to a small wine cellar. And that's where he finds her. JonBenét had been strangled, struck on the head, killed sometime in the night while the family slept upstairs, while Santa Claus presents were still sitting under the tree. She was 6 years old. Now, let's talk about this ransom note, because this ransom note is unhinged. And I don't use that word lightly. It is 2.5 pages long. 2.5 pages. For context, most ransom notes are a few lines. Get the money, here's where to drop it. Don't call the cops. Done. This one goes on and on. It is the longest ransom note in FBI history. It was written on a notepad found in the Ramsey home, using a pen found in the Ramsey home, meaning whoever wrote it sat down inside that house, found their own paper, found their own pen, and took the time to write 2.5 pages before leaving. It demands exactly $118,000, not a round number. Not $100,000 or $150,000. $118,000, which just so happens to be the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. A number that would not be public knowledge. A number that someone would only know if they were close to the family, or inside the family's finances. The note refers to a small foreign faction. It contains phrases that investigators believe were lifted directly from movies: Dirty Harry, Speed, Ransom. It reads less like a real kidnapping demand and more like someone who had watched too many thrillers and was performing the idea of what a ransom note is supposed to sound like. Handwriting analysts spend years going back and forth over whether it matches Patsy Ramsey's writing. Some say yes. Some say absolutely not. Some say they can't tell. Nobody ever agrees on anything. The Boulder police and the Ramsey family enter one of the most public, most bitter, most damaging legal wars in American true crime history. The parents are treated as suspects in the press long before any charges are ever filed. Their reputation is destroyed in real time on national television. In 1999, a grand jury actually votes to indict both parents on charges of child abuse resulting in death. The DA refuses to sign it, says the evidence isn't strong enough, no charges, ever. And then, 2008, new DNA evidence. Touch DNA found on JonBenét's clothing and underwear points to an unknown male who is completely unrelated to the Ramsey family. The Boulder District Attorney formally and publicly clears John and Patsy Ramsey. Patsy Ramsey had died of ovarian cancer 2 years earlier, in 2006. She never saw her family cleared. She died under the shadow of public suspicion for a crime she almost certainly did not commit. The unknown DNA has never been matched to anyone. No suspect has ever been charged. Every few years, someone new gets looked at. A former family friend, a neighbor, a suspect from another state, and every time it goes nowhere. JonBenét Ramsey would be 34 years old today. Her killer is still out there, living their life, and nobody knows who they are. Number 2. The Isdal Woman. Okay, this is the one that most people on this list haven't heard of, and I genuinely think it might be the most mysterious entry on this entire list. Not the most violent, not the most famous, but the most mysterious. Because this isn't just an unsolved murder. We don't even know who the victim is. November 29, 1970, Bergen, Norway. A professor is out hiking in a valley called Isdalen, which translates to the Ice Valley, with his 2 young daughters. It's a cold Norwegian afternoon, and near the base of a cliff partially hidden among the rocks, he finds a body, badly burned, almost beyond recognition. Around her, an empty liquor bottle, sleeping pills, 2 plastic bottles that had contained gasoline. Investigators get to work and very quickly figure out this was not an accident and not a straightforward suicide. She had ingested a fatal dose of sleeping pills before the fire started. The fire was set after she was already dying, possibly after she was already dead. Someone arranged this scene, or she arranged it herself. But here's where it gets truly strange. Nobody can figure out who she is. She had been traveling across Norway and across multiple European countries before that, under at least 8 different fake identities. Her fingerprints don't match any criminal record anywhere in Europe. Her dental work doesn't match any missing person report. Hotel staff across Norway remember seeing her. Remember she seemed nervous. Seemed like she was watching for someone, but nobody knows her real name. At a train station in Bergen, investigators find 2 suitcases she had checked in under a false name. They open them, and inside, clothes, with every single label cut out. Everyone. Deliberately removed so the clothes couldn't be traced to a country or a store. Multiple wigs, several pairs of glasses, cosmetics, a coded notebook filled with numbers and words written in a cipher. Norwegian intelligence gets involved and partially decodes the notebook. The sections they manage to crack reference travel itineraries, city names, dates, meeting locations. So let's just recap what we have here. A woman traveling Europe under 8 fake names, who systematically cut the labels out of every piece of clothing she owned, who carried multiple wigs and disguises, and who kept a coded notebook of meeting locations, turns up dead, staged, in a Norwegian valley in 1970. Who does that? The Cold War was at its absolute peak. Norway was a NATO member. Bergen was a coastal city of serious strategic significance. Intelligence agencies across multiple countries started paying very close attention very quickly. The theory, never confirmed, never proven, is that the Isdal Woman was a spy, and that what happened in that valley was not a suicide, that she was killed to keep something quiet by people who knew exactly how to make a murder look like something else. In 2017, Norwegian public broadcaster NRK relaunched the investigation as a major multimedia project. Forensic anthropologists rebuilt her face from her skull. New DNA analysis was run. The results suggested she most likely came from Central Europe, possibly Germany. Norwegian police officially reopened the case. They have still never identified her. She is buried in a cemetery in Bergen. Somewhere, there are people who knew exactly who she was. A family, colleagues, handlers, people who watched the news in 1970 and recognized her face and said nothing, and they have stayed silent for over 50 years. Number 1. Jack the Ripper. Of course it's Jack the Ripper, because this is the case, the one that started everything, the grandfather of all unsolved murders, Whitechapel, London. Autumn, 1888. At least 5 women murdered in the same East London neighborhood. All killed the same way. Throats cut with a long, sharp blade. Whoever did this understood human anatomy. They worked fast, in the dark, in one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the world. And nobody saw them. Letters start arriving in September. The most famous, signed Jack the Ripper, gets published and the city loses its mind. Another letter arrives later with half a preserved human kidney inside, which the writer claims belonged to one of his victims. Most criminologists think the letters were hoaxes. Some believe at least 1 or 2 are real. We genuinely don't know. Over 130 years of investigation. Hundreds of suspects. Nobody ever charged. But here's what I want you to take away. The women killed in Whitechapel were not symbols. Marianne Nichols had 5 children. Annie Chapman had tuberculosis and still walked London streets every night trying to earn her lodging fee. Mary Jane Kelly was 25, sang Irish folk songs, and had her whole life ahead of her. These women deserved justice. They never got it. The most disturbing thing about Jack the Ripper isn't the mystery. It's that he just walked away, and the world built a legend around him instead. 7 cases, 7 killers who went completely free. Some are definitely dead by now. Some may have lived long, comfortable, ordinary lives while families waited for answers that never came. But here's what I find weirdly comforting. These victims are not forgotten. Every video, every documentary, every person looking this up at 2 a.m. is refusing to let these names disappear. And that matters. Which case messed you up the most? For me, it's Hinterkaifeck every single time. Drop yours in the comments. If you want a full deep dive on any of these cases, let me know below. I'll make those videos. And if you're new here, subscribe. We do this every week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.